This object looks simple. A plastic disc. A little bigger than a silver dollar. You can hold it in the palm of your hand. But this isn't just a piece of plastic. It's a machine. A time machine. It can't send you into the past or the future. It does something far more powerful. It rewrites time itself. This small, quiet object is arguably the most disruptive technology of the 20th century. It changed the rules of love, the shape of a career, and the very rhythm of human life. And chances are, the world you live in right now, the job you have, the city you live in, the way your entire week is structured, was built on the logic of this little wheel. How did a tiny pill, housed in a clever plastic calendar, become a treaty that redrew the map of our lives? This is the autopsy of the clock that reprogrammed the world. Our story begins not with a bang, but with a quiet click. It's August, 1962. Picture a bathroom counter, the air thick with steam and the scent of talc and Pond's cold cream. A woman's thumb finds the knurled edge of a pink plastic dial. The wheel whispers forward, click, and a single foil blister gives way under her finger. A tiny pill emerges. On the wall calendar, red circles mark the weeks, but the real calendar, the one that truly matters, is the one in her hand. This small ceremony, this daily communion with chemistry, is a radical act. This is the moment a routine becomes a rule. A private act that will have massive, public consequences. This is the story of how we learn to schedule fertility. To understand how we got here, we have to roll the clock back another decade. To the 1950s. A time of scientific cowboys and molecular frontiers, where the secrets of the human body were being unlocked at a dizzying pace. Our first stop is not a pristine corporate lab, but Mexico City, which in the 1940s and 50s was the Wild West of hormone research. It all started with a brilliant, eccentric chemist named Russell Marker. Marker discovered that a specific type of Mexican wild yam, the cabeza de negro, was loaded with a compound that could be cheaply and efficiently converted into progesterone. He tried to sell his idea to American pharmaceutical companies, but they laughed him out of their boardrooms. So he went rogue, started his own small lab in a garage, and single-handedly shattered the European monopoly on hormone production. That rogue lab grew into a company called Syntex. And it was at Syntex that a young, ambitious chemist named Carl Gerasi, a refugee from Nazi-occupied Austria, pulled off a molecular masterstroke. He wasn't trying to create a contraceptive. The goal was to synthesize an oral version of progesterone to treat menstrual disorders. In 1951, he and his team created norethindrone. A synthetic progestin. An almost perfect imposter of the natural hormone that tells the body, you're pregnant. Don't release any more eggs. Crucially, this version was orally active. It could survive the digestive system. It was the key. At the same time, 1,000 miles north, in the button-down suburbs of Chicago, the corporate giant G.D. Searle was in the same race. Their own chemist, Frank Colton, working in a much more conventional environment, developed a nearly identical compound, norethindrone, just a few months later. The race to forge the chemical key was over, a photo finish. Syntex and Searle were now sitting on the chemical equivalent of nuclear fission. They had the power to turn off ovulation. But they were terrified of it. It was too controversial, too radical. A key is useless without a lock. And, more importantly, without someone brave, or perhaps foolish, enough to turn it. That's where the story moves to a modest lab in Worcester, Massachusetts, buzzing under fluorescent lights at the Worcester Foundation for Experimental Biology. Here, we meet our unlikely team of revolutionaries. First, there's Gregory Pincus. The ringmaster. A brilliant, supremely confident, and controversial biologist from Harvard. Years earlier, in the 1930s, he had achieved in vitro fertilization in rabbits. He had created life in a petri dish. The press had a field day, dubbing him a Dr. Frankenstein creating test tube babies. Harvard, a deeply conservative institution, was horrified. They denied him tenure. Pincus was essentially exiled from the scientific mainstream, a man with a massive intellect and an even bigger chip on his shoulder. Working alongside him, quietly and meticulously, is Min-Shu Chang. A biologist from China who was the true lab wizard. While Pincus orchestrated, Chang did the crucial, painstaking work. He's the one who ran hundreds upon hundreds of experiments, injecting rabbits and rats with these new compounds from Syntex and Searle, tracking their cycles, examining their ovaries. It was Chang who figured out the precise dosage, who proved, beyond any doubt, that these new synthetic hormones could reliably and temporarily shut down ovulation in mammals. And then there's John Rock. The public face. And the most complex character in this drama. Rock was a deeply respected Harvard gynecologist and a devout Catholic who attended Mass every single morning. He was a fertility expert who had helped hundreds of women get pregnant. He saw this new technology not as a violation of nature, but as a way to work with it. He reasoned that since the pill used a hormone to create a temporary state of infertility that mimicked pregnancy, it was simply an extension of a natural, God-given biological process. He believed he could convince the Catholic Church that this wasn't contraception, it was just rhythm. A scientifically enhanced rhythm method. His reputation and his moral certainty would be crucial in taking this from the lab into the real world. So you have the exiled genius, the quiet workhorse, and the pious physician. But all of this, the labs, the research, the salaries, it all costs money. A lot of money. And no one wanted to fund it. So who paid for the revolution? This is where the story pivots, thanks to a secret, two-woman operation that reads like a spy novel. On one side, you have Margaret Sanger. By the 1950s, she was in her 70s, a veteran of a long, brutal war. She had been arrested multiple times for distributing information about contraception, which was illegal under the federal Comstock laws. She had seen countless women die from botched back-alley abortions. She had championed diaphragms, but knew they were messy, unreliable, and required a doctor's permission. Her life's dream was a magic pill, something cheap, simple, and utterly controlled by women. Through a series of connections, Sanger meets Gregory Pincus. She tells him her dream. He tells her he thinks it's possible, but that it would cost a fortune. Sanger didn't have that kind of money. But she knew someone who did. Enter Catherine Dexter McCormick. The money. And not just some money, one of the largest private fortunes in America. McCormick was a towering figure in her own right. A ghost in a machine of 20th century progress. She was one of the very first women to graduate from MIT with a degree in biology. She was a dedicated suffragist who fought for the right to vote, once helping to smuggle funds to activists in London by sewing cash into the linings of fancy dresses. Her personal life was also marked by tragedy. Her brilliant husband was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she spent decades managing his care and his estate. This experience deepened her conviction in a woman's right to control her own body and destiny. When her husband died, she gained full control of the international harvester fortune. Sanger arranges a meeting. Pincus lays out the science. McCormick, with her biology degree, understood every word. She saw the potential immediately. She didn't just see a drug, she saw a lever that could move the world. She opened her checkbook and asked Pincus, "How much do you need?" He asked for a modest sum for initial research. She wrote the check. A short time later, he came back and said this would be a much bigger project. She wrote a much bigger check. Over the next decade, through discreet transfers and trusted intermediaries, Catherine McCormick single-handedly bankrolled the development of the birth control pill. This wasn't a corporate project. It wasn't a government grant. It was an act of philanthropic rebellion, a radical alliance between an activist and an heiress who were willing to wager a fortune on an idea everyone else deemed impossible, immoral, or both. Now they had the chemistry. They had the scientists. They had the money. But they needed one more thing, a place to prove it worked on a massive scale. That place was Puerto Rico. In 1956, the large-scale human trials began. Why there? The answer is a disturbing cocktail of convenience, colonialism, and control. As a U.S. Commonwealth, the island was not subject to the strict anti-contraception laws of many mainland states, yet it was still under FDA jurisdiction. The U.S. government, obsessed with the Malthusian fear of a population bomb, was actively promoting population control on the island as part of its economic program, Operation Bootstrap. This created an environment where a large-scale fertility control trial wasn't just tolerated, it was encouraged. There was also a network of birth control clinics already in place, and a large population of poor women in densely populated housing projects like Rio Piedras, many with large families and desperate for a reliable solution. It was, from the researcher's perspective, the perfect laboratory. And that fact sits on a massive ethical fault line that runs right through the center of this story. Let's be clear, the drug worked. Ovulation was suppressed with near-perfect reliability. From a purely scientific standpoint, it was a staggering success. But the pill they were testing was a hormonal sledgehammer. The dosage was 10, even 20 times higher than the pills we know today. And the side effects, reported by the women in the trials, were brutal. Crippling nausea. Blinding migraines. Constant dizziness. Uncontrollable breakthrough bleeding. 18% of the women in the study experienced these side effects. Yet in their final paper, Pincus and Rock framed this as evidence of the drug's effectiveness, noting that such reactions are common in pregnant women. They were dismissing the suffering of their patients as a mere symptom of the cure. And what about consent? The paper trail is chilling. Many women were not told they were part of a clinical trial. Many were not told the pill was experimental. Some who couldn't read English signed consent forms they couldn't possibly understand. Follow-up was sparse. When women dropped out of the study because the side effects were unbearable, they were often just labeled as unreliable participants in the clinical notes. Tragically, 3 young women died during the trials. The research team flew in from Boston and, without performing autopsies, quickly declared their deaths unrelated to the drug. Case closed. That clinic sign-in sheet, it is both a historical document and a warning. It testifies to a medical miracle, yes. But it also testifies to the inconvenient truth that this tool of liberation was engineered on the bodies of poor, marginalized women of color, whose suffering was recorded as data points and whose voices were lost in the quiet margins of history. This is the pill's original sin. A paradox we still live with today, that a tool of profound personal freedom was forged through a profound act of ethical compromise. Have we ever really reconciled that? Despite the shadows, the machine of progress moved forward. In 1957, the FDA approved Searle's drug, Enovid. But not for contraception. That was still too explosive. Instead, it was approved for severe menstrual disorders. A convenient, clinical euphemism with a white lab coat. But doctors, and their female patients, were not stupid. They quickly figured out that the drug's most reliable side effect was the prevention of pregnancy. An underground network of knowledge spread from woman to woman. Finally, on June 23, 1960, the US government made it official. Enovid was approved for contraception. The genie was officially out of the bottle. But almost immediately, a new problem emerged. A human problem. Remembering to take a pill, from a simple bottle, every single day at the same time, without fail. Adherence was terrible. Women forgot. And when they forgot, the pill failed. This is where a little-known industrial designer enters the story and changes everything. His name is David Wagner. In 1962, a competitor, Ortho Pharmaceuticals, hired him to solve this problem. And his solution was pure genius. He realized the problem wasn't memory, it was routine. He understood that the pill wasn't just medicine. It was a schedule. So he designed a package that looked and worked like a calendar. The Dialpak. It was an elegant piece of behavioral design. Injection-molded plastic that felt substantial in your hand. A wheel that turned. Stamped letters, sun, mon, tue, wed, an arrow to align your intention with your ingestion. It was tactile. It was audible, that satisfying daily click. It transformed a chore into a ritual. It lived on the bathroom counter or in a purse, a constant physical reminder. But Wagner's real brilliance was in helping to engineer the 21-7 regimen. 21 active pills, followed by 7 sugar pills, or placebos. Why? The science didn't require a 7-day break. In fact, a continuous dose would have been even more effective. This was pure social engineering. That week of placebo pills allowed for a withdrawal bleed, simulating a normal menstrual period. This wasn't for the woman's health. It was for society's comfort. It reassured husbands who might be suspicious of this new technology. It reassured doctors who were wary of disrupting a natural process. It was designed to soothe regulators and even, John Rock hoped, the Pope, by making this radical new chemistry seem like it was still respecting the traditional rhythms of life. The packaging didn't just dispense a drug, it dispensed reassurance. This was the moment that medicine learned to keep time. The Dialpak turned a chemical into a chronometer. A punch clock for the endocrine system. The pill was now in the world, beautifully packaged and increasingly popular. But it wasn't yet free. In many states, it was still illegal. Distributing information about contraception, let alone the devices themselves, could land you in jail. So the battle moved from the lab to the courtroom. In 1965, a case comes before the Supreme Court, Griswold versus Connecticut. Estelle Griswold, the courageous head of Planned Parenthood in Connecticut, and a doctor, C. Lee Buxton, deliberately opened a clinic and got themselves arrested for the crime of talking to a married couple about birth control. The Supreme Court strikes down the Connecticut law, establishing a new, radical right that appears nowhere in the Constitution, the right to marital privacy. The government, they said, has no business in the bedrooms of the nation. Great news for married couples. But what about everyone else? What about the millions of unmarried women and men? That question is answered in 1972, in Eisenstadt versus Baird. Bill Baird was a birth control activist, a showman who traveled the country in a van he called the Plan Van. To challenge the ridiculous Massachusetts law that banned contraception for the unmarried, he deliberately got himself arrested by handing a can of contraceptive foam to a young woman after a lecture at Boston University. His case went all the way to the Supreme Court, which ruled that denying contraception to the unmarried was a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. Justice William Brennan wrote the stunning majority opinion, "If the right of privacy means anything, it is the right of the individual, married or single, to be free from unwarranted governmental intrusion into matters so fundamentally affecting a person as the decision whether to bear or beget a child." But just as the legal walls were coming down, the medical walls were going up. Reports, long suppressed by the drug companies, were now surfacing, linking the pill, especially the early high-dose versions, to potentially fatal blood clots, strokes, and heart attacks. A bombshell 1969 book by journalist Barbara Seaman, The Doctor's Case Against the Pill, laid out the evidence in terrifying detail. The secret was out. The flashpoint was the 1970 Nelson pill hearings, chaired by Senator Gaylord Nelson. Imagine a packed Senate hearing room. A panel of sober, male doctors and scientists discussing the risks and benefits. But then, a group of feminists, led by an activist named Alice Wolfson, disrupt the proceedings. They had been sitting there for days, growing more and more furious. They stood up and shouted, "Why are you excluding women from this panel? We are the ones who are taking the pill." It was a lightning bolt. Their protest made national news. The hearings were forced to adjourn and reconvene with women's voices finally included. The result changed medicine forever. For the first time in U.S. history, the FDA mandated that a drug must come with a patient package insert. A leaflet, written in plain language, explaining the risks and benefits directly to the person taking it. That little folded piece of paper you find in every prescription box today. That is a direct legacy of the women who stood up and demanded that medicine finally speak plainly to its users. So by the mid-1970s, the full machinery was in place. The pill was legal, it was becoming safer with lower doses, it came with a warning label, and it was widely available. The ability to schedule fertility was now in the hands of millions. And the world started to change. Subtly at first, and then seismically. Think about the life plan of a young woman in 1955. It was a race against a biological clock. There was something called the marriage bar, an explicit policy at many companies that forced women to quit their jobs when they got married. A career was a gamble. You finished school, you got a job, you got married, you had children. That was the script. The fear of an unplanned pregnancy was the invisible hand guiding every decision. Now, with reliable contraception, that script could be completely rewritten. The biological clock could be paused. A new word entered the cultural vocabulary, and it changed everything: later. I'll have kids, later. I'll get married, later. First, I'll go to law school. Or medical school. Or get my PhD. Suddenly, investing years in higher education wasn't a gamble against biology, it was a rational economic decision. And the numbers are staggering. In 1970, women earned less than 10% of medical and law degrees. By the mid-80s, that number was approaching 40%. The American median age at first marriage began a steady climb that has never stopped. The infamous shotgun wedding started to disappear, fundamentally changing the nature of courtship and marriage. The pill didn't cause this revolution alone, the women's movement and economic changes were powerful forces. But the pill was the fuel. It was the practical tool that allowed individual women to turn abstract ideals of equality into concrete, 5-year, 10-year life plans. It synchronized the private body with the clock of public ambition. The world you see outside your window was built on that new timeline. The double-income family. The modern corporate ladder that assumes employees can delay family formation to climb it. But this new schedule also created new pressures. The burden of contraception fell almost entirely on women. And the expectation of sexual availability, without consequences, shifted the dynamics of dating and relationships in ways we are still grappling with. It solved one set of problems while creating a new, more complicated set. So where is the Dialpak today? It's everywhere. It's hiding in plain sight. Look at your smartphone. The daily reminders to take your medication. The cycle tracking apps like Flow or Clue, mapping your luteal waves in pastel heat maps, turning your body into a dataset. They are the direct digital descendants of that plastic wheel. They run on the exact same logic: rotate, align, release. Track, predict, control. The options for controlling time have multiplied into a dizzying array of choices. Long-acting IUDs and implants push later out by years. Egg freezing pushes it out by decades, stretching the boundaries of biology to fit career arcs and mortgage ladders, turning fertility into a line item on a budget. But the old battles are raging again. In 2022, with the fall of Roe v. Wade, the treaty of privacy that began with Griswold came under renegotiation. Suddenly, the privacy of your menstrual data on that tracking app isn't just a matter of convenience, it's a potential legal liability. Access to contraception itself is being challenged in legislatures. Even our workplaces, which were so eagerly reshaped by the schedulable body, are showing the cracks. Parental leave policies, the tenure clock at universities, partnership tracks at law firms, they all still treat biology like a manageable, predictable project. A calendar that can always be kept. Ask any working parent how well that assumption is holding up. And just when it feels like the clock is turning backwards, it jumps forward. In 2023, the US approved the first over-the-counter daily birth control pill, OPIL. A new chapter in access is beginning, moving contraception from behind the pharmacy counter to the drugstore aisle next to the aspirin. The calendar in plastic just keeps changing shape. But it is still keeping our time. This simple plastic disc did more than prevent pregnancies. It rewrote our relationship with time itself. It declared that a human life didn't have to be lived at the mercy of a biological calendar. It introduced the radical idea that maybe, just maybe, we could draft our own. Freedom, it turns out, can be measured in hours you can budget, not just rights you can name. But that freedom was built on a complex and often troubling history. A history of brilliant science, radical philanthropy, legal battles, and profound ethical compromises. The fine print of that treaty, drafted by scientists and philanthropists, clerics and judges, is still being written. The symptoms and stories of those who paid the highest price are still recorded in the margins. The ghost in the machine is the Dialpak central promise, that our most intimate risks can be organized into predictable days. We have built our modern world on that comforting, daily click. And we have to ask ourselves, what schedules have we created? And who is living with the side effects? This is the kind of hidden history we uncover here every week. If you want to understand the invisible forces that shape our world, consider subscribing. Your curiosity powers this channel. For another investigation into how a simple object changed history, check out the video on your screen now. And now, I want to hear from you. Look at the world around you, in your work, your family, or your own life. What's the biggest change you think this little pill set in motion? Let's talk about it in the comments below.